Hello, everybody, and welcome to Debut Spotlight on a Mighty Blaze. The blaze was sparked when COVID-19 extinguished the traditional in-person book tour. Our New York Times bestselling authors and co-founders Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt joined forces to promote new books coming out. This is Debut Spotlight, where we put the spotlight on wonderful debut authors. I am ANDI RAND. I'm a Facebook director at The Blaze, a writer myself, and a producer. I am so excited to have on debut author ELAINE U, the author of Ocean's GODORI. She is a writer who lives in Seattle. She's slung coffee, shelved books at Elliott Bay Book Company, as well as performed in music venues, as she does have an MFA in flute performance, which is incredibly cool. This is her first book, as you might imagine, came out actually this Tuesday, the 23rd, and where to buy it will be in the comments, so make sure you check that out from Hillman Grant Books. And we are so excited to have you here today, ELAINE. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm so excited to be here. It's been a whirlwind week, so I'm very happy, but just a little tired.
I'm sure. How has it been on this path to becoming published for the first time and now finally having the book out there? How has that been feeling?
It feels really weird. I actually haven't seen my book out in the wild yet since it got published. So to me, it still seems like it might not be happening. Like, it's a very surreal feeling.
Yeah, that makes sense. The cover is actually so beautiful of your book. I love it. Just feels so classic. Yes, the like red and teal is just so pretty, and how it ties into those colors I felt like were so present in the narrative as well. So I love seeing that reflected on the cover. It's just it's a really good cover. Not every cover grabs you, but that was one I was like, wow, I really, really love that one.
Yeah, they did such a good job. It's kind of got like almost old like sci-fi, like retro vibes. The illustrator was Chiuk Choi, who's a Korean illustrator. I'm so thrilled they got her. I've been a fan of hers for years. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll need to follow her because it's very like it feels like almost an old Star Trek poster or something. It's very retro futurism, which is...
Yeah, totally. She's got just such a cool, that's the best word for it, just a cool vibe throughout. I think I found her because she had designed the poster for the Busan International Film Festival in Korea. Oh, cool. And she's done work like all across the board, but definitely check her out. She's on Instagram too, so yeah.
Yeah, and I'll also put the link to ELAINE's Instagram in this so everybody can follow you. But I did want to ask, this Ocean it's a sci-fi novel, which I love. It's a very kind of hard sci-fi novel because we're thrown into a really cool, different future than the time we're living in. Could you kind of describe the plot of your novel for everybody?
Yeah. Ocean's GODORI is a space opera that takes place in a future where a space agency out of a unified Korea dominates the solar system. The main character, Ocean, is a Korean space pilot who's fallen from grace after she got the reputation for being a little too quick with her gun, and a mission went awry. Ocean and her crewmates are thrust to the forefront of an interplanetary conflict when her best friend is framed for murdering his family. It's got high-stakes space chases, hoverbike races, found family vibes. It's got a slow burn romance, because why not? And I really just wanted to explore the sci-fi genre and use it to explore ideas of identity and how we contend with where we come from, and use that to figure out who we're going to be going into the future.
And it is a hard sci-fi, I would say, but I don't say that to intimidate anybody. I think it's still very approachable. I know sci-fi can be a little scary sometimes when you're like having all the new terms and everything thrown at you, but I do think you handled it in a very approachable way where you can really pick up what's happening. I loved reading it because a lot of the slang that is present is Korean or based in Korean, even if it's not exactly. I'm lucky, one of my sisters actually speaks Korean, and I would sometimes text her and be like, what does this mean? I saw at the end there's a glossary, and I was like, oh, I should have looked there first. So advice for everyone reading it, there is a glossary in the back. If you struggle and you don't happen to just luckily know somebody who speaks Korean. I mean, online translators are there too, but it's more fun to ask somebody. But yeah, how did you kind of go about deciding what you're going to use as slang and what you're going to incorporate in just the character's everyday language?
Language was a huge part of the book. It's a very Korean-dominated world, so I wanted this idea of like, if you are Korean or understand Korean, like a lot of Korean slang currently is based off of like internet culture, like what you see on forums or online, or like what's easy to type. And I tried to think about that, or what was going to be intuitive, like going into the future, what might circle back around in terms of slang, or what might arise. And that informed a lot of it. I did try to, when using Korean, have enough context, so like you'd be able to figure out what it was. And I think sci-fi and fantasy are genres that are very forgiving of that. Like you usually go in there and they'll be like, we went to, like such and such a town and drank this such and such,
Yeah.
and you're kind of supposed to pick it up as you go along, which is the adventure that I wanted to have in this book as well. And also Ocean herself feels very sort of not part of the Korean culture. So it was kind of a way for the readers to be on the same side of Ocean, who is also very much like, oh, I don't think I know that Korean term or like cultural reference, but like I'll kind of file that away for later.
Yeah, I loved Ocean being this kind of very badass, usually kind of a male archetype of the sort of one just sci-fi lead tends to skew very heavily towards men. So I love seeing Ocean in this kind of rogue, very cool leader archetype. How did you come about designing her character?
Ocean was she was not difficult to write, but difficult in the sense that she has a very like hard exterior, but like it's very like, still waters on the surface, and a lot of thinking and calculating on the inside. So she like tends to be very good at certain things like flying the ship, but is like very, very bad about like talking about her feelings, and that was just a lot of fun to come up with and sort of write about. And in a way, Ocean was almost cathartic for me, because I'm very like conflict averse and tend to bottle things up. And she also bottled things up, but she's a lot more direct with her feelings, or like letting people know that she doesn't like them, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I always love getting to see more direct, like female characters that don't have to be so soft all the time. And I loved that about Ocean. And I loved, as somebody who, a lot of my critiques in life have been, you're a little too direct. I always love seeing characters like that, where I'm like, I get that, where you sometimes say something and see other people react, and you're like, I see that.
There's that famous scene in what is that? In Emma, where they're like at a picnic party, and she says something that she thinks is so witty, but then like sees the horrified reactions of everyone around. She's like, oh god.
It's that thing where you kind of have to, you check after and you're like, I guess I should have thought that through before just throwing that out there, but here we are now.
We exist in this reality now.
Yes. And I loved, she's not our only point of view character. We also have Sasani and we have Teo as well, who are very cool characters in their own right. How did they kind of come about, and how did you choose this triad as a kind of our point of view characters?
Yeah, that's a great question, because when the book started, it was a little more, there were many more points of view, and it wasn't focused on three characters, but kind of like everyone was kind of mixed in there. That was a decision very early on to narrow it to those three. And Teo was easy because their friendship, Ocean and Teo's friendship, was like one of the first things that I came up with or wanted to explore in this book. So he, like, from the get-go was going to be a main character. And he's a great foil to Ocean, just because all three of the characters are very like they think a lot. So it was fun to have their different points of view and how they think. But Teo is a different sort of calculating than Ocean is, and from Sasani too. And then Haven Sasani was completely different from the other two, and it was nice bringing him in. And once again, like, he was very much a foil to Ocean in a lot of ways, just in terms of, like, they both come from these cultures that in current day are endangered for like whatever reason, or considered that way, but still exist in the world of this book, but have very different relationships to these cultures. Like, Ocean looks Korean but doesn't feel like she belongs, whereas, like, Haven has very much been brought up in his culture, but is a child of two different people and doesn't feel like he looks the part.
And that was something that was very interesting with Haven Sasani, is that he's, like, when you get introduced to him, you also see that people react differently to him based off his culture, that when they, like, see his tattoos, which are very significant to his culture, that people have a very discriminatory attitude towards him. And I mean, it's interesting as a reader because you're like, oh, what does that mean? Is that something, it gets you interested in, like, why do people have that attitude? What does that mean for him? How did you kind of come up with the Mortimians, which hopefully I'm saying that correctly?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And their sort of culture and how it seems so important. Like, a lot of people completely rely on them, but then they also discriminate against them in the same breath, kind of.
Yeah. It was it came from a lot of different things. One of them was just when I was thinking about what this world looked like in the future. Like, what would these practices look like or be viewed if, hopefully, like, technology and health advancement have improved, and, like, would that mean that people are even more distanced from death, and how would that make them feel about death, or, like, the customs surrounding it? So this culture that Haven belongs to, Mortemians, are people that sort of have taken up these rituals because they realize the importance of carrying on these traditions, but also face a lot of stigma for doing that because of this, like, distancing from death. And I read a ton of books about, like, funeral customs and rituals from around the world for it. The seeds for Haven in particular came from an article I read years ago about the vultures dying out in Mumbai and how that was affecting, like, the Zoroastrian burial customs, and, like, whether they'd be able to move forward, and what that would look like for them in the future, which, again, like, was a part of how I wanted Haven to be similar to Ocean, in that Ocean is also a part of this storied culture of the Haenyeo. But right now, people are talking about how, like, they're very treasured and honored, but a lot of the Haenyeo are older women. So what is that going to look like, going into the future? And another part of Haven, the reason I made him half Japanese was a nod to a movie called Departures. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a Japanese movie about a guy who is a cellist, and he returns back to his, like, childhood hometown and answers an ad in the newspaper to pick up a job. And it turns out to be for a nokanchi, a ritual mortician. So he learns about, like, these rituals in, like, preparing bodies for funerals and stuff, but faces a lot of social stigma for his role. But the movie is a lot about just the sort of grace that he embodies while he's doing this, and the comfort he's able to offer the people through these rituals. And it's very much, even though it's a movie that centers around funerals and deaths, it's very much a celebration of life. So that was a part of it too. I just wanted that feeling.
Yeah, really cool. I haven't seen that movie, but I will add it to my
Yeah,
to
you should
watch
check it out.
list.
It's so good.
Yeah, and I do love things like that. I'm a person who I grew up, I was very morbid. I was very into goth culture when I was younger and like death obsessed because I had a lot of anxiety and, you know, we don't talk about death very much in America. It's just like one of those taboo things. And it's not just America, but that's, you know, that's the only place I have reference for. So if you're a morbid kid who's like bringing it up, people get really unsettled really fast. So, but I've always loved things like goth culture for all its flaws tries to treat death as like beauty, and it's very interesting when you run into cultures or like I studied voodoo, I took a class on voodoo in college, how there's other cultures where death is very woven into the everyday, and it seems to me like a healthier mindset than the way we try to keep everything at arm's length. So that's a really fascinating explanation and kind of tie-in to the Mortemians, because that's not, I wasn't even consciously thinking of that, but it makes sense that, like, of course, these people are always a reminder of everyone's mortality. So people are going to be rude, be disrespectful. They shouldn't be, but that's their kind of knee-jerk reaction. And it's fascinating seeing kind of also how Haven kind of interacts with Ocean at the beginning, where she's trying so hard to be respectful of him, and he's unsure if it's respect or if it's her being unsettled by him or having that attitude of like not wanting to touch him, not because she's respecting a boundary of his, but because she's like doesn't want to get that close to him.
Right, because that's what he's used to, like getting from other people.
Yeah, and I loved seeing their relationship evolve over the course of this. And this is something we talked about a little before we went on air, but I did ask, and I wanted to ask further on air, that this is something that you've planned as more than one book, and you're working on that next book now. If you can talk as much as you are allowed about that.
I can talk in vague and general terms, but yeah, when I first wrote this, it was meant to be part of a larger arc. And I thought out the journey and the characters that way. When we sold this book to Hillman Grad and Zando, we had asked them if you know they wanted the other book like right away, and it was more of like we'll see what happens. And it was very important to us to like create the character arcs within the first book and try to make it stand on its own with like the potential for more. So I'm happy to say there is more that we're working on, and it's on the way. So yeah, I'm excited for that.
Yeah, because when I finished it, I didn't feel like, oh, there's no ending. It's not a cliffhanger by any means, but I was like, oh, I really would love to see more of this. So, and I was like, I want to know how certain things develop. I want to see them keep happening. So I'm going to be very much looking out for the next book in this series. And I think everybody will have that experience where it is a consistent narrative on its own. You don't need another book, but it's going to be really exciting to have another one and get to see things followed up on. And I loved to get to see all of these characters just kind of going on further. And with sci-fi, there's such a rich world of sci-fi. Did you have a lot of inspirations of other sci-fi things, or was it mostly like taking things from less sci-fi sources like The Departure and other things like that?
I think my love of sci-fi and space operas definitely fostered this. It's in some ways a very classic story of like the underdogs versus the big guys. It's going out into new planets, and it's got like action and adventure paired with like introspective character studies, which are the hallmarks, I think, to a lot of sci-fi space operas. In particular, I wanted to take all those aspects that I loved about space opera and put them through a non-Western Korean lens. And in that vein, I think the biggest inspiration or the biggest like kind of seed for this book came from Three Body Problem. I wonder, it's somewhere on the shelf there, along with Three Body Problem by Zixing Liu, translated by Ken Liu, which was the first non-Western sci-fi that I had read. And that opened up a whole new world. I was like, oh God, what have I been missing? And I read like Ted Chiang and Charles Yu, which are also like amazing. And we've got like more translated sci-fi now too, which is awesome. But I think as I was reading and like searching for more and being like, I want to read more, it was just very much like why not just write what I want to read? So this was like very much that. But the launching board was like definitely all the sci-fi I read like growing up, as well as like this wealth of sci-fi that we now very fortunately have, but you know, I would love to have more of non-Western.
Absolutely. And one thing I did think was interesting is I've seen your book compared a lot to Firefly, the series, which is a series I grew up loving. But I thought it was fascinating because Firefly is a series with a lot of Asian inspiration in and of itself, without a lot of Asian representation, much to say, in the cast or the people kind of behind the scenes even. So is Firefly one of your sources, or do you just find it interesting that your book gets kind of compared to it?
I watched it when it came out, and of course, like I loved it, and I'm thrilled that people are comparing it just because there's so many like warm things that I feel for that show, like the found family, and like there is kind of an overarching plot, but it's very much about that crew and how they're growing together. For me, like the bigger influence was Cowboy Bebop.
Oh, nice.
Which is an anime, and it's got very cool vibes, and you think it's got jazz and it's got all of that. But similarly to Firefly, there is sort of an overarching plot, but it's very much about the characters, and it's very heavy in the themes of like nostalgia and running away from your past and how these characters kind of all fit together, which is hopefully some of the elements that I have in mind too. Yeah.
I would absolutely say so. And I always love things like that about people who are trying to escape their past, but also, of course, none of us actually get to escape our past, no matter how hard we try. Even if you go to space, it's still there, which is always the beautiful thing about sci-fi, is that it shows people kind of literally going as far as they can to different planets, to different solar systems even, and they're still running into those kind of same problems.
Yeah.
And with this, did you like plan out this arc beforehand, or were you very just letting it flow how it was?
Yeah, that's what is it? The planner versus the pantser question, right? Yeah. I'm much more of a planner. The funny thing was with this book, I probably planned out the first like 70% and then the last 10%, because I knew where I wanted it to end up. And then like I left like a little chunk at the 3/4 mark, because I was like, my characters in the plot should have the freedom to do what they want, you know? I don't want to force them into anything. And then I got to that part, I was like, oh God, what have I done? Like, this is a huge mistake. So not doing that again for myself. For the most part, yeah, it was definitely like I wrote out the narrative arc of it, but the first thing and the most important thing for me were the character arcs. That was like the first thing I wanted to nail down. Like, where do they start? Where am I hoping that they'll end up? And like, how will we get there? So that drove a lot of the writing of it.
And I do love that. I love character-driven stories, which this absolutely is, where it's like there is a plot, and the plot is very interesting itself. I loved kind of seeing what was happening with this and how there's some pretty intense scenes of action that are actually like even kind of scary, that I don't want to spoil things, but like certain things that happen to characters, there's some scenes where it's like, oh, that's actually kind of terrifying to imagine. That is so freaky, and such a beautifully written description that makes me feel chills. That I really loved seeing that, as well as like the characters just really be the ones that drive the plot, though, that we know it's happening because, and we want to know more about happening only because we want to see where these characters go. We want to see, how are they reacting to this? Are they going to be okay with all of this going on? Which is always the most stressful question, I think, in all of this, is that you're like, oh God, are these people going to be okay at the end of this? Or...
I just want them to be okay, or I just want them to be friends again, like something like that.
Yes. Where it's like, I don't want the bad things to happen to them. I know that's the plot, but and for these characters, they also represent just such interesting cultural kind of commentary on capitalism in our society, and sci-fi has always been a really big political genre for making those kind of critiques. So was it very intentional on your part to work in those kind of commentaries on capitalism and our greater political culture?
I feel like I should say it was all very intentional, like in the author way.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it just came from what I was feeling at the time, when I was writing it, which was a few years ago, but
Mm-hmm.
just these ideas of like, what do you do when you have very different ideas from people that you love and respect, but just don't see eye to eye with?
Mm-hmm.
Or like, what do you do when you see the way that image or the message is being skewed by people in general, which is a line throughout this book. And that's very true about sci-fi being so political. And it's kind of funny too about how, like, even when going into the future, it's like, wow, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So the themes of like capitalism, colonialism kind of just rose from like, well, what happens when there are people in power, and how do they abuse the power, and so so these things happen,
Yeah.
So it's just again intuitively feeling out what would happen and how the people react, and from that how they react to that reaction.
Yeah, and I do think it is always, I think, going to be political whether people mean to or not, because it is always like, when you're imagining the future, who are you imagining there? Who are you imagining is quote unquote like in charge, or is the prominent person people listening to in the future, is always going to be political, even if it's completely unintentional, because you have to imagine somebody.
Yeah,
Uh,
totally.
I was also wondering, because you're a debut author and you have an MFA in flute performance, have you also always been a writer this whole time, or is writing something that came to you a little later in life, or what was that journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was I was always kind of writing for fun, and then I love movies, so I was always writing like film reviews for myself, and then like eventually for an outlet, Mediaversity. But that was kind of how I kept up the writing. And then stories wise, like I always kind of wrote for my sister. I have a younger sister who's 9 years younger than me.
Yeah.
So she was pretty much the only one who saw my stories. And I would never tell anyone else that I was writing. Like, even when I was sending this out to literary agents, like, I didn't tell anyone. I don't recommend that. I recommend, like, finding your community, doing a writing group, like, getting critique. But I was, like, terrified of having people I knew read it, and also like people look me in the eye and be like, well, this is what I thought about your book. Like I couldn't bear the thought of it, which is why I like sent it out without really telling anyone about it. But yeah, I did the MFA thing. I came to Seattle and started teaching, and playing and trying to find gigs, doing the whole like music hustle. And writing was kind of something I did for fun. And I had written this trilogy, or started this trilogy, when I was in high school, and had never written the third book. And 2020 rolled around, and I was like, this year I'm going to write that third book. I'm going to send it to my sister. It's going to be great. And then we went into lockdown. I was like, okay, cool. Like, I will write that book now.
Yeah.
And I wrote it. I was like, that was actually kind of fun. Like, maybe I'll write another one. And that was this book.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how the writing journey has progressed.
Yeah. No, writing is so personal. I totally understand how it can be so scary to especially have people read it. I mean, it's
Yeah.
kind of terrifying every time. It must have been kind of a surprise for the people who didn't know when you were having a book published that they're
It
like,
was
"Oh."
very much a surprise, especially like I kept it very secret, even when I got an agent, even when I like signed. And then like they officially announced, and I think I posted on my Instagram, I was like, hey, I wrote a book. It's coming out.
That is an incredibly funny way just to, like, all of your friends and loved ones are just like, "Oh, wow."
Yeah, they're
This
like,
is
you what? But also like you write, and like, yeah.
Yeah, but, I mean, that's a really fun surprise, and hopefully, going forward, do you have a writing group that you're getting involved in, or are you still kind of easing yourself into
I'm still easing myself into that. I don't have a writing group, but I do have a few friends that like I
Mhm,
exchange stuff with, which has been really nice. And it's been really nice finding other writers and authors, like as I've been doing this, and like meeting other authors who are kind of like, we're all like debut authors,
mhm.
just sharing our experiences together as well as our writing has been really like beautiful and heartwarming, and it's been really nice.
That is really great, and it's great. I know I've heard of that happening where a debut author is in the same cohort, or it's the best way to kind of phrase it, end up really connecting over the fact that everything's coming out at the same time and you're all kind of dealing with all these emotions and new experiences at the same
Yeah.
time. And how have you found, now that it's officially out? I know you said it doesn't feel quite real. Hopefully, you'll start seeing it in bookstores soon. Do you find touring and kind of promoting it to also be kind of that unreal feeling?
It is very unreal. Every time it happens, it ends, and I'm like, what just happened? Like, it all just went so fast. And each time I'm like, still doesn't feel real. Maybe it'll feel real like halfway through when I'm on stage.
Yeah.
Yeah. But a lot of people ask, like, what was the most difficult part of writing the
Mhm.
book? And I didn't find writing it to be difficult, but I found a lot of this after stuff. Like, I'm such
Mhm.
an introverted person.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's like really exciting, but it's also like so terrifying.
Yeah, it is nerve-wracking to get kind of thrown in, even on something like this, with a person who we only met, 15 minutes before this interview went live, and then you're just kind of going from there. But you're doing really well, by the way. You're
Thank you.
giving
That's
great.
thanks to you. Like you've created the ambiance and the vibe and the questions. So thank you.
No, I love doing the debut show has been new for me, but it's been really fun to work with authors who are kind of doing it for the first time, and all of those experiences and emotions, because it is really crazy and heightened to have that happen, and especially for such a cool and original novel that does get compared to a lot of other sci-fi, because people always are going to compare things to
Yeah.
entice people, and because that's just humans. But it is such a unique experience, honestly. I don't You can compare it to these other things, and found family and slow burn, but it's really a unique experience that I really loved reading, because it felt so refreshing, because like I said, I love sci-fi, and reading this felt very different from a lot of the other sci-fi I've read. And I love when I get to experience something that feels different and new, and like I'm really being taken to a new place than before.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for reading it, which is
Yeah.
still mind-boggling for me that yeah. totally. So.
No, I'm sure it is. And it makes sense to me now learning that you're really into movies, because it also felt very cinematic. Like the descriptions felt like you could see them so clearly. Like I could see this absolutely being picked up and adapted into a series, which maybe one day will happen. I'm sure you can't. Even if you knew anything, I'm sure you couldn't talk about it. But is that a goal for you, to maybe one day see this as a movie or a TV series, or is it just like what happens happens?
It's definitely what happens happens. I think my literary agent just had me in conversation with a film TV agent, Orly, just to like talk about that in general. And she's like, do you see it as more of a TV show or a movie? And I was like, honestly, like, I can't even believe like people are reading it. So like, I'm not even at that stage.
Yeah.
But I love movies. So it definitely like, I saw a lot of scenes visually while I was writing it. So I'm glad that like came across, because I know that that doesn't always like clearly come through, even if you're like, especially if you're like basing it off of something visually that you're, you know, transmitting to words. I think it would be a lot of fun. I wonder too, though, there's so much like introspective stuff that I think would be really interesting to see interpreted on the screen. But yeah, there's just a lot of like fun action too that I would love to see how that transmits. I think too, like I feel like in the very early stages, I had thought about, because my sister's an artist, I was like, maybe I should turn this into a graphic novel, and like that would be fun too, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of really cool options. And with the action scenes, they were so compelling to read, which I find very impressive. Did you study a lot of action, or is it just from your background in movies? Because I know sometimes action scenes can feel muddled. And yours luckily completely didn't. I could follow what was happening, which is always really nice.
That's hard. Yeah. That's always a danger, I feel like, when writing or reading action scenes. Gosh, I was telling someone, I had just recently read an interview where someone was saying how writing action scenes and sex scenes are very similar. Like, as long as you know where all the limbs are, that's half the battle. But
very true.
Yeah, I think the usual thing you're told when writing action scenes is you want to keep the language very short to match the action. For me, I think it kind of goes back to what you were saying about caring about the characters. It making the action clear involves not only like writing out the action, but writing like the impact it had on the characters. Like, what do they feel? Or like if they get hit in the face, like what is that pain kind of come out? And I also compared it to Jackie Chan movies, where like if you ever watch a Jackie Chan movie, or like, you know, listen to him talk about how he films and edits these scenes, he does this really interesting thing of showing the hits twice, which you don't always notice because it happens so quickly within the movie, but that's his way of making sure like the impact comes across. And so I feel like I try to do that in my writing, not just writing the hits twice, but having the hits land and like seeing how the characters react to that landing.
Yeah, and I do feel like that really came across, because even with things that happen somewhat significantly in the past, like Ocean's incident that led to her being disgraced and things, like the characters still very much carry things with them. They're not like, you know, cool guy action heroes who experience these really scary or horrifying or intense things and then are like, yeah, whatever, and brush it off, and you're like, yeah,
explosion in the back, like sunglasses. Yeah.
No, we get to see them react in this really true to life human way of like, they have to carry this with them, and that's just how it's going for them. And I love seeing a world where these things get to have a lasting impact. Characters don't just get to do something and then brush it off because it was cool, so now everybody forgives them and there's no consequences. And I also loved, there's a former ship that Ocean used to serve on that was called the Hadoken, which was very funny to me as like an Easter egg, kind of.
I was like, is this too much? Like, is it too silly? But then I was like, I gotta do it.
No, I really, every time the Hadoken came up, I found it really, really funny and charming because I was like, it is what people would do though. They would name their ships
Yeah.
things like that. Um, so that was very fun for me. And the first time I came across it, I laughed. And then I almost like double checked, like, oh my God, I'm reading that right, right? This is
Yes,
what I think it is.
100%. Yeah. They have that. There's a ship called the Shadowfax, which is from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Just a lot of different things like that. It's like, what if you like had a really cool ship and you were a captain? Like, what would you want it to, what would you want it to represent or name it to be?
Yeah, and I think that's really fun. It's fun getting to see these references because I feel like a lot of times we can take ourselves too seriously almost, and every ship is named something like, I don't know,
The
something.
Destiny, like
Yeah.
20. Yeah.
So it was really fun to see those more, it almost felt more realistic names because that's what people do when they have things like that. They go for their fun fandom references and their.
Yeah. And some of them regret it, but some of them
Yeah.
just stand by it.
Mhm. And it was I loved also the dynamic between the whole crew, which you've talked a bit about, that we have their three perspective characters, but the whole crew is very still involved in the story, even if we don't get their point of view. Um, and they don't all always get along, but seeing their kind of connections was so impressive to me that they all felt so involved in this story and all super unique, super interesting characters. So, did they develop that way? Partially, do you think because you started writing initially from a lot of perspectives, or just because you really wanted to make sure the whole crew was part of the story?
I think both. That was a great point about starting from having all the different perspectives, because I did have all these sections and chapters from like the different crews' points of view, but I did want to make them each like unique and kind of like when you're making like a soup and you're like, what
Yeah.
will happen if I add this spice? Like that
Yeah.
kind of thing. So that I really enjoyed that. I truly love like exploring these different characters and seeing how they look at the same situation from different vantages. When I ended up narrowing it to the 3 points, like sometimes I'd be like, well, maybe we'll try this scene, and I wrote it like from this character's point of view. It's like, oh, actually, like maybe from this. So it was like really fun for me to like write the same scene from these different vantage points.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was a lot of fun. That's my favorite thing, writing the characters and also hearing like asking like who was your favorite character from the book and getting like so many different answers. I love that.
Yeah. No, my favorite character is probably Ocean, which is probably the most basic response, but I
I
just
love
really
that though.
love
She
her.
she needs love. Yeah.
Yes, she does.
She
She
does
does.
truly. Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing, but I was like, gosh, I want you to be able to open up, but I also understand why you can't, or why you feel like you
Yeah.
really can't to anyone. But I'm like, dang, if you could only see that there's so many people who care about you through this.
Mm.
All right. And this is something that I always like to ask near the end of an interview, but is there anything I should have asked that I didn't, or anything you kind of wanted to talk about that we didn't quite get to talk about?
I was gonna bring up the characters thing, like just because
Mhm.
I love that so much about writing, and that's probably the process I enjoy the most. Um, I don't know. I guess you covered things so well. Yeah, we talked about how it's a sci-fi space opera, but sort of a unique way of looking at it. I wanted Ocean to go on this journey of not fitting in and feeling like, well, I'm Korean, so what does that mean for me? Like,
Mhm.
am I Korean enough? Which was like a very big question that I wanted to explore and address within the book. And for her to go on this journey of realizing that I am Korean, so what does that mean for the definition of the word rather than me fitting into that?
Mhm.
So that was a big part of the book for me. So that's, I guess I'll say that.
Yeah. And that is a really great part of it to explore. And I will throw up on the screen where you can get this novel. So please check it out. And here's Elaine's website. And what are you doing next? And where can people follow you?
Ooh, you can. I'm the most active on my Instagram. I'm terrible at social media, but I have at least that.
Yes.
You can see lots of pictures. Next week, I'm going to be in San Diego at Mysterious Galaxy Bookstore.
Awesome.
So I'm excited for that. It's like it's a sci-fi genre bookstore, which I'm so excited for.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll be there, I believe Wednesday is the next part of my tour. Yeah.
Nice. That is super cool. And don't forget to check out all of that in the comments so you can follow along with Elaine. Make sure you buy Ocean's GODORI because it is really amazing and a really refreshing new take on sci-fi. And thank you so much for joining us on Debut Spotlight. And thank you so much, Elaine, for joining us as well. And make sure you like, subscribe, and follow for more amazing authors.
Thank you so much.